My next guest is Chris Griffith. He is a former senior writer for The Australian. He's now actually back writing as a freelancer for The Australian, and he writes for Channel News, and he's a freelancer, and he's been my guest on TNT already more than once. So, Chris, welcome to the program.
Alex, nice to be on TNT again. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Now, Chris, it was only last week as we speak that the Technology in Government conference was on, Tech in Gov, and two of the events you were a panel moderator for, and you were also preparing your own, presenting your own solo event. But let's start with what could be the most impactful presentation of all from the three that you were involved in, and this is using technology to curb domestic violence. So let's go into that. Now, what other ways the technology is being used to help prevent domestic and family violence?
Well, tech can play a really important role here. We've got a situation where we've had some pretty horrific, or not pretty, but very horrific cases of murders with domestic violence. Up here in Queensland, there's been the Hannah Clark case where 3 children and Hannah Clark herself were murdered in their car and was set alight, as you probably know. And we've had a case that rivals that in New South Wales where a house with 6 children in it was set alight and 3 of them died and 3 of them were rescued. The thing about domestic violence is when it gets lethal like that, you get some of the worst violence and horrific cases that you could imagine. And this has really captured the attention now of authorities in a way that it probably hadn't before, that has seen a lot of work going on to look at how to curb domestic violence. Up here in Queensland, they've announced a 4-year program to try and do that. But what this event focused on was, how can we use technology to try and prevent domestic violence escalating to that point? So the main effort is to stop things before they get to those horrific levels. And all the experts will tell you that these events don't come out of the blue. There's always been a whole range of things going on that lead up to this occurring. So the question is to have a really good information system that means those potential victims early on providing information to authorities that they're concerned about what's happening at their home, and a lot of them do anyway. So that the authorities can see that that really the things are getting pretty awful in those situations. And when I say a lot of them do anyway, they do to one agency, but we have a siloed system in government where victims might talk to some workers, some social workers, but that information never gets to police. And so the information is, as is called, siloed. It's with one agency. So there's a couple of things here that's really important. Firstly, to have a good channel of communication with potential victims really early in the piece. And the second is to break down these silos so the information can be shared and you get a much more complete picture of what's going on in a particular household.
Yeah. Well, look, Chris, we do need to take a quick break, and so we'll be back with you. We've got plenty more to talk about. It's very interesting and important stuff.
This is Talking Tech with Alex Zaharov-Reutt on today's News Talk, TNT.
Thanks for joining me again. My special guest in this second part of the program is Chris Griffith, a well-known technology journalist in Australia. Now, we're talking about how technology can curb domestic and family violence. And so, Chris, how can people who are the victims of domestic and family violence use these technologies in a way that isn't obvious to the person perpetrating the violence, yet can also help to keep the victim safe and or alert others to the potential or actual danger that they're in?
Well, as I mentioned, there was a need to collect this information early, and that's where tech comes in. So you've got databases or that collect this information, and to try and make sure the person has a means of providing that information, you need to provide different streams to provide that information. Like you could, for example, have a phone app, and there is ways where you can hide apps now. In fact, Apple this year announced on iPhones, you can actually have apps which are invisible on your phone, and they're triggered by face recognition. So a perpetrator couldn't actually activate those apps or see them, because you need the actual person who owns the phone activating them. And we'll see that sort of thing develop. So firstly, you've got iPhones. Then if the victim, if you like, is able to do it, they'd be able to, say, log in to a website and provide information the same sort of way, or physically go to a police station or to welfare agency when they're out and about doing the shopping, when their partner isn't around or what have you. You've got to, unfortunately, you've got to try and pick those moments. There's no way around that. But if there's a variety of different ways of providing information, they can do that. But one of the important things is, while retaining privacy laws, have a means of whatever agencies they go to, that data can be collected and shared with other agencies, so that you get a proper picture of what is happening in that place. Now, one of the experts we had provided a video was Dr. Amanda Gearing, who's an expert on coercive control. And she spent a number of years looking at the kind of controlling behaviours that a perpetrator uses to control their partner. And they have a pretty sophisticated points rating system of kind of dozens of behaviours, and they can kind of see that controlling behaviour escalating and leading to potentially dangerous levels. So there's a lot of quantitative work analysing past cases that can show what leads to some of these events in the past. And like any scientific approach, when you're using data, you try and use the past to predict what is happening in the future. So that's a quantitative approach that can be taken. But they're the sort of things that are in trying to use what we in tech know is the power of data analysis, even artificial intelligence. Janine Mahoney was talking about the idea of using AI to do, machine learning, going back, looking at cases, as I've just talked about, and finding and using that to make predictions about the future. So we were concentrating on that. Now, there is, of course, a lot of gadgets there, or potential gadgets, like you can use speakers to monitor or listen out for sounds of violence or screams, or people with very raised voices to then alert authorities. It's a bit hit and miss, I suppose. It could be someone listening to the, a
TV show,
horror movie at night or something like that.
That's right.
And they get the same thing. But there's those sort of things. We had one person on the panel, Peter Ford, who's a really well-known former CNN, NBC journalist, a former Australian journalist, who has a company called Control Bionics. And he was talking about, ankle bracelets, which are used under court orders, that could be extended beyond just where people are, but can actually monitor kind of their heartbeats, their anger levels, and when they're kind of aroused to possibly become violent. Now, this is probably at an early stage, but all those sort of things are possibilities as well. So that's more for the perpetrators, that if a perpetrator is seen in the vicinity of someone they're not supposed to be because of a court order and they're in an agitated state, that might be a trigger to get authorities concerned about it. What we have, and one of the big problems is, it's really hard for police. They have to go and visit so many places, and there's just not the person power out there in a lot of cases to really put together what is, the real situation out there. So tech is then going to be called on to try and help with this, like it is everywhere else, to get those full pictures, analyze it, and provide the best information for health, welfare workers and authorities to act in those cases ahead of time.
Yeah. And then we have the issue of the Minority Report pre-crime, the Tom Cruise movie where AI and technology is trying to, in that movie, it was a human who was in some sort of a tank. It wasn't AI at all. But, you don't want to be accusing people of something that they haven't done. But clearly, all that's yet to be worked out. It's being worked on. And technology gives us these abilities that we didn't have before, especially to figure out what is the most important thing for the authorities to investigate, the police. Now, for those that want to watch this presentation from the Tech in Gov conference, you've published it in full at your LinkedIn page. Just search for Chris Griffith. I'll also have an article about it on my site, techadvice.live, for those who want to be able to find it as well. But do you have a final message about this? Because we've got plenty more to talk about and only a few minutes left.
Yep. YouTube's another that they can search for under artificial intelligence or whatever they want to search under, or under my name or your name, and it's on YouTube as well. Yep.
Yeah.
So
now, the next presentation that you were the moderator of was about AI regulation and government, something a lot of jurisdictions and countries are grappling with. So who were the panelists in this particular session?
Well, we had some great panelists. We had Lorraine Finlay, who is the Australian Human Rights Commissioner, and she was talking about AI bias and privacy and not letting machines have the definitive say or make decisions about life and death decisions, as a very early starting point. We had Professor Toby Walsh, who's well known in Australia. He's one of the most high profile of our AI experts. He's now the chief scientist at the AI Centre at the University of New South Wales, and he's written several books on AI and particularly AI and warfare. And just so that we had balance, we had Max McNamara from AvePoint, which works closely with Microsoft, and he provided a bit of a corporate perspective on regulations. He says big tech can see for the area to be credible that they need regulation. So they're not against regulation, but the issue is what sort of regulation and how strong should the regulation be. And in Australia, we're still at very early point with regulating in the AI space. We've had some regulation that impinges on AI around deep fakes that the federal government have put in train, much needed legislation because of young people being online and so on. But there's a whole heap of areas there. Now, we have the Europeans this month. We're supposed to see the European European Commission AI Act come into force. Now, I've labelled the Europeans as the tough love advocates. They love AI like everyone else, but their regulation is really a lot tougher there. The Europeans have been much stronger regulators than, say, the Americans, which have taken a more softly approach, and they are mostly American companies. So I raised in the discussion the idea that how's the Australian government going to deal with that? Because on the one hand, we have a very strong relationship with the US, particularly with AUKUS and defence and that, but we want to keep the US on side, but we want to make sure that our citizens are well looked after and have their rights there. And there's a very pertinent case now where Meta and Google, but Meta in particular, have said that on Instagram and Facebook, they're entitled to use all the media that you've had there for years and years to train their AI models on and use it. And a lot of artists in Australia, Alex, advertise their artworks on Facebook. So it means that Facebook now have the right with their AI to get that and train their models on it. So they'll see variants of their artwork being used in AI models without them getting any money or even without any consultation. Now, to give you an idea of what that means in regulation, in Europe, because they've got a tougher regulation, citizens can opt out of that. So if they don't want their stuff used in their posts for AI training. They have the means since late June to sign a form online and opt out of it. Now, Australian users can't do that because we don't have the legislative clout that offers that. And now I don't know what the situation is. I think in the UK it's similar to what's happening in Europe, but that's where we, one of the areas where we don't have much clout as it was. Now, there's lots of areas, goes beyond privacy. That's a privacy issue. Copyright, which we're going to talk about later. AI bias, the concern, which the Americans were fairly quickly on the ball with, that say with going for jobs, that AI bots that vet people for jobs are going to have the same bias as the human regulation or the human recruiters that they've been trained on. And so that can mean that people are automatically disqualified because humans in the past didn't like certain socioeconomic groups or age groups. They didn't like seniors like me, or they didn't like young kids, or they did like one above the other. All those biases turn up in these models. And of course, people, as Lorraine Finlay said, they tend to trust AI's decision making in recruiters because they think they're not, they're devoid of human emotion. They'll make good analytic decisions, but they have all these biases in there. As we mentioned, warfare. We have Russia, for example, Kalashnikov, which your viewers might know from the days of Kalashnikov rifles and that. Now, Kalashnikov has been pretty big in AI, and there's been tanks that we haven't seen necessarily them being rolled out in Ukraine so much, but tanks that they're autonomously can be from the outskirts of a city driven into a city, and they've got infrared sensors, and they can detect humans, and they can detect them presumably also by their appearance, and they can just automatically, without any humans around, make a decision to fire. And the same with drones. They can detect from the sky if they've got a kid there that's got a rifle that looks like it's a model the terrorists use. It can automatically decide, or the machine can decide to fire on that person. Now, what Lorraine is saying, Lorraine Finlay, is that we should have international agreements that we don't have machines making those decisions by themselves. And in other situations, we're not using machines to make the definitive decisions. They're advisors to humans about what to do. They don't make the choices. And she was talking about that at length.
Look,
that's we've only got before we get into other areas of
we've only got a couple of minutes left. It's we're running low on time, but I did see either on X or on Quora a slide from a 1979 IBM presentation that says computers cannot be held accountable. Therefore, humans must always make management decisions. And so that's a nearly 50-year-old piece of advice from IBM, and we're seeing it happen today. Now, anyone
you can't put a computer in front of a firing squad, can you? Or put them in prison for 30 years.
I mean, in effect, they're doing that with autonomous drones in the overseas that are supposedly autonomously firing. I don't know if that's the case as yet. I mean, it's probably tests have been done. Now, we've really literally only got a couple of minutes, even like a minute to go, but everybody can watch this panel presentation in full at your LinkedIn page, and I'll have an article on my site. What's the short version on your presentation on copyright and AI, which will be available to watch on YouTube and your site and through my site early next week?
Okay, copyright's not a boring issue when it comes to this. We're dealing with generative AI ripping off the intellectual property of hundreds or tens of thousands of authors, artists, musicians, photographers. All that stuff is used for generative AI. So I go into that in depth. So Australia started off with people being sentenced here for stealing a loaf of bread. Now we've got plundering on unprecedented scale online. Do we care about it? Should we legislate? What's the nuances of the debate? There are nuances in it. I go into that in that presentation. So yeah, I strongly recommend, if you're interested in looking at that, go online, and have a look. That's going up in the next day or so, by the end of the weekend.
Well, Chris Griffith, wonderful technology journalist, freelance, the Australian Channel News. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope we can speak again in the future.
Okay, thanks again, Alex. Much appreciated.